I can't believe it. You look so much like someone I used to know. This is crazy. That was all Maxfield Harrington could whisper, the man whose name alone made the most dangerous men in Chicago fall silent when he saw the little boy sitting alone in the corner of that orphanage, drawing quietly with crayons. The boy's dark hair fell across his forehead, his green eyes locked on the paper with a focus that sent chills down Max's spine. Because those eyes, that face, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking they didn't belong to a stranger. They belonged to a woman he had loved and lost 8 years ago. A woman who had vanished from his life carrying a secret he never knew about. And when the boy looked up and told him the name of his toy, the most powerful man in the city felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Before we begin, please note that this story explores themes of family, redemption, and second chances. It is meant to inspire reflection and empathy. If you're not ready for an emotional ride, you may want to take a deep breath before continuing. Maxfield Harrington pulled his glossy black Rolls-Royce Phantom to a stop in front of the gate of St. Francis Orphanage in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in June of 2024, at 9 o'clock in the morning. Pax Mercer, Max's right-hand man and chief bodyguard for 15 years, sat in the driver's seat. 2 other guards rode in the black SUV behind them. Max glanced into the rearview mirror and said curtly, "It's an orphanage, not a negotiation. Wait outside." Pax nodded without a word, but his eyes still swept up and down the street with the habit of a man who'd spent his entire life in the shadows. The only purpose of this trip was to hand over a check for $50,000 and take a few good-looking photos for Harrington Holdings' media department. The company had just been criticized by the press over a controversial urban development project, and a generous donation to orphans would be the perfect medicine for its public image. That was all. No more, no less. Max stepped out of the car, spine straight in a perfectly tailored black 3-piece suit, the faint scar on his left eyebrow, a souvenir from the days when nobody knew his name, flashed briefly under the sun. He walked with the stride of a man who owned everything he passed, his sharp, cold gaze sweeping the area before he headed for the gate. In Chicago's underworld, they called him the Phantom, not because he stayed hidden, but because anyone who stood against him disappeared. This morning, before coming here, Max had eaten breakfast alone in his penthouse on the Gold Coast. An 8-seat table held only a single plate and a cup of black coffee. The apartment was so quiet he could hear the steady tick of the Swiss clock on the wall. He'd been living like this for 8 years, since the day Vivian vanished from his life without a single goodbye. No one sat across from him. No one asked how his day was. He had everything money could buy, and nothing money couldn't buy. St. Francis Orphanage was an old, pale yellow building, its walls blotched with damp stains and its iron gate rusted with age. But the front yard was carefully tended, bright with flowers of every color and a small garden where a few children played under the watch of a nun. Their clear laughter carried through the morning air. It was a world completely unlike Max's. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with thick framed glasses, smiled when she saw him. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Harrington. Sister Agnes is expecting you. Please follow me." They walked through narrow hallways, the walls covered with children's drawings and photographs of smiling faces. The scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint aroma of home-cooked food drifting through the air. Everything here was so simple it was almost rough-edged, nothing like Max's office in the Loop, with its sweeping view of the Chicago skyline, its sleek modern interiors, and the meeting room hidden behind a false wall that very few people even knew existed. Sister Agnes, a small nun of about 60 with kind eyes, welcomed him into an office that was plain but neatly kept. "Mr. Harrington, what a blessing to have you here. Your donation will make such a difference in these children's lives." "It's my pleasure to support your work, sister," Max replied in a polite but distant voice, handing over the check. "I'd like to see the facilities if possible." "Of course. Let me show you around." They passed the kitchen where volunteers were preparing lunch, the sleeping quarters with simple but clean bunk beds, the classroom where a teacher was explaining math to a group of children of many different ages. Max asked a few courteous questions, but his mind was elsewhere. He just wanted to finish the tour as quickly as he could. His phone vibrated lightly in his jacket pocket. Max flicked his eyes over Pax's message. "Holloway is moving on the south side. Meeting tonight." He locked the screen and slid the phone back into his pocket. The underworld never stopped turning, even when he was standing in the middle of an orphanage. Sister Agnes stopped in front of a door, painted a soft pale blue, and turned to him with a warm smile. "And this is our recreation room." Max pushed open the pale blue door and stepped inside. Then he froze. The boy was still sitting there, alone in the corner of the room, head bent over a sheet of white paper, with crayons scattered around him. Max swallowed hard, forcing himself to steady his breathing, and walked closer. He crouched beside the small table, low enough to be level with the boy's eyes. The drawing on the paper showed a simple house, with a red roof, yellow windows, and in front of the door, a long-haired woman holding the hand of a little boy. "Hi there. That's a really nice drawing. You like to draw, don't you?" The boy glanced at Max for a brief moment, then gave a small nod, but he didn't speak. Max looked to the side of the table, where an old toy robot sat, its paint faded, one arm broken. "Cool robot. What's his name?" The boy looked at the robot, then back at Max. "His name is Max, like the hero in a story my mom used to tell me." It felt as if someone had driven a fist straight into Max's chest. Vivian. She'd used to call him my dark hero on nights they lay together, teasing him that he pretended to be hard as stone, but inside, he was softer than anyone. He drew in a slow, deep breath and kept his face unreadable. "That's a great name. Your mom must have told good stories." The boy nodded, his eyes still fixed on the drawing. Max asked again, his voice gentler now. "Do you remember your mom?" The boy stopped moving the crayon. For the first time, he lifted his head and looked straight into Max's eyes with those clear green eyes. "A little. She used to sing me to sleep and tell me stories about a hero who was strong but had a sad heart." Max almost lost control. Every word the boy said cut cleanly into memories he'd buried for 8 years. But the instinct of a man who'd spent his whole life in the underworld wouldn't let him show weakness in front of anyone, not even a 7-year-old child. He forced the emotion down and kept his voice steady. "She sounds like an amazing person." Max stood and turned to Sister Agnes, who was waiting by the door. "Sister, may I have a word with you in private?" "Of course." They went back to her office. Max closed the door and went straight to the point. "I need to know everything about how that boy ended up here." Sister Agnes opened a case file folder. Rowan was brought in by the police 2 years ago, when he was 5. His mother passed away in a car accident. There were no known relatives. The documents only listed the mother's name, Vivian Caldwell. No information about the father, Vivian Caldwell. Max repeated the name inside his head. It was her. He was absolutely certain. "May I see his birth certificate?" Sister Agnes hesitated for a moment, but something in Max's eyes made her decide to trust him. She pulled out another sheet of paper. The birth certificate clearly stated, "Born on the 15th of March, 2017. Father, unknown." Max calculated in his head. The time of conception matched perfectly with the stretch of time when he and Vivian had been together. "Sister, I need to take a DNA test. I believe Rowan is my son." The nun looked at him, her eyes wide with shock and a fragile spark of hope. "If that's true, it would be a blessing beyond words. Rowan always asks about his father. I always tell him his dad must be out there somewhere, just waiting for the right moment to find him." "How do I proceed legally?" Max asked. "We'll need to contact family court. If the DNA confirms paternity and you pass the necessary evaluations, you can file for custody." Max nodded with crisp certainty. "I'll get everything started today, but please, don't say anything to Rowan yet. I don't want to give him false hope. I understand perfectly. It'll be our secret for now." Before he left the orphanage, Max went back to the recreation room. Rowan was still drawing, but the picture had changed. Beside the woman and the little boy in front of the house, there was now a tall man standing on the right, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "Can I see?" Max asked, crouching again. "It's my family," Rowan said simply. "Mommy, me, and my dad who I haven't found yet." Max felt his throat tighten. He had to gather every ounce of control so his voice wouldn't shake when he asked the next question. "Can I come visit you again?" Rowan looked at him and tilted his head. "You can, but why would you want to visit me?" Max thought carefully, then answered, "Because you remind me of someone very special I knew a long time ago." And for the first time since Max had walked into this room, Rowan smiled. In that smile, Max didn't just see Vivienne. He also saw the dimple in the boy's left cheek, the very same dimple Max himself had had since he was a child. The moment Max slid into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, he pulled out his phone and canceled every appointment on his schedule for the day. He called Dr. Warren Griffith, the private attorney who'd been with him for 15 years, and demanded an urgent meeting tonight. Then, he called the most reputable lab in Chicago and booked a DNA test for the following morning. Pax drove in silence for a while, then glanced at the rearview mirror. "What happened in there, boss? I've never seen you like this." Max stared out the window. Chicago's streets drifted past like a blurred film. He stayed quiet for a long time before he finally said, "I think I have a son, Pax." Pax didn't ask a single follow-up question. He just nodded and kept his eyes on the road. After 15 years at Max's side, he'd learned there were moments when Max needed loyalty more than questions. That night, Max returned to his penthouse on the Gold Coast, the 2,500-square-foot apartment, with its high ceilings, artwork on the walls, leather and oak interiors. Everything so expensive it was almost absurd. But tonight, it all felt emptier than it ever had. Max poured himself a whiskey and stood by the glass wall, looking out over Chicago's skyline. The city's lights spread below like a glowing carpet. This city feared him. The most powerful men bowed their heads when they heard his name. But not a single person among those millions out there was waiting for him to come home. He controlled nearly half of Chicago. Yet he couldn't control the loneliness that ate him every night in an apartment too large for one man. He set the whiskey down and went into the bedroom. Behind the closet, in a corner no one knew about, there was a small wooden trunk. Max opened it. Inside were the keepsakes from his love affair with Vivienne. Photographs, a few handwritten letters, a silk scarf that still carried a faint trace of the perfume she used to wear. He lifted one photo, taken of the two of them in a cozy restaurant in Aspen. Vivienne was laughing brightly, brown hair falling loose over her shoulders, and her hand rested discreetly on her belly. She'd been pregnant in that picture, and he hadn't noticed. Max remembered the last night before Vivienne disappeared. He'd been in his office at the penthouse, the door left slightly ajar. The phone rang and he answered. It was a business call, but not the kind of business Vivienne knew about. Max's voice was cold, sharp, issuing orders to someone on the other end in the language of a man who decided who lived and who didn't. It was the voice of a man Vivienne had never met. He didn't know she was standing just outside the door. He didn't know she'd heard everything. And he didn't know that in her womb at that moment was their child. Vivienne left the next morning. Not a letter, not a message, not a single explanation. She vanished as if she'd never existed. Max had looked for her. He'd used every resource, every connection, every channel a man like him could use. But Vivienne didn't want to be found, and eventually he stopped. He'd thought respecting her decision was the right thing to do. It was the biggest mistake of his life. Max stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he remembered a detail Sister Agnes had shared when they spoke privately in her office. She'd said that when the police found Vivienne's car after the accident, there'd been an envelope in the glove compartment. Inside was a letter addressed to Harrington Holdings' office. The letter had never been sent. Vivienne had been on her way to find him when the accident happened. She'd decided to come back. She'd decided to tell him about Rowan, but fate hadn't allowed it. Max sat on the edge of the bed, the photograph still in his hand. "Forgive me, Vivienne," he whispered, his voice rough in the empty room. "Forgive me for not being there when you needed me, but I promise I'm going to take care of our son now." He set the photo down, opened his laptop, and began researching the process of establishing paternity through genetic testing, the process of filing for custody, the required psychological and social evaluations, the timelines and the documents he'd need. He read every clause, every step, every referenced case. He was ready to do all of it, and more, if it meant bringing Rowan home. The clock read 3 o'clock in the morning. Max still hadn't slept. For the first time in his life, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago was wide awake, not because an enemy was threatening him, not because of a multi-million-dollar deal, but because of a 7-year-old boy sitting with crayons in an orphanage in Little Village, drawing a family he still hadn't found. The next morning, Max arrived at the lab at 7 o'clock, an hour before it opened. Dr. Warren Griffith was already there, a briefcase in hand, every required document arranged the night before. The technician unlocked the doors earlier than usual when he saw the two men waiting in the hallway. Max sat in the sampling room chair and calmly rolled up the sleeve of his suit, but his jaw was clenched tight. When the technician said the results would be ready in 48 hours, Max looked straight into his eyes. "Do it in 24. I'll pay whatever it takes." "Mr. Harrington?" Griffith cut in, his tone steady, the voice of someone who'd handled pressure for years. I understand your urgency, but we also need time to prepare the legal paperwork. I'll start drafting the petition for paternity recognition and the request for temporary custody while we wait." Max nodded but didn't say anything else. Outside the lab, Pax leaned his back against the wall beside the entrance, his eyes never stopping their sweep of the parking lot. He counted the cars around them, watched every person moving along the sidewalk, noted the emergency exit at the end of the corridor and the stairwell behind the building. It was a habit he'd never been able to break, the habit of a man who'd lived his whole life in the shadows. In Pax's mind, there was only one simple thought. If the boss said that was his son, then the boy would be protected with security equal to the boss himself. The following day, Max's phone rang at 10 o'clock in the morning. The lab was calling. "Mr. Harrington, the results are ready. You can come pick them up." Max canceled every morning meeting and drove there immediately. Griffith was already waiting in the lobby. They were led into a private room. The technician came out holding a file, but instead of handing over the results right away, he paused and said, "Mr. Harrington, there was a contamination issue with the first sample. We had to run the test again." Max's face drained of color, not pale with fear in the way he'd known on nights when danger pressed close, pale in the way of a man who'd just glimpsed the thing he wanted most, and suddenly believed it might be ripped from his hands. Griffith placed a hand on his shoulder and gave a light squeeze. The technician continued, "But the second run is complete. Here are the results." He handed over a sealed white envelope. Max took it. His hand was shaking. For the first time in his life, the hands that had signed multi-million-dollar contracts and held the power of life and death in Chicago's underworld were trembling, not because of danger, because he was terrified of losing what he hadn't even had time to hold. He opened the envelope, pulled out the page, and read the line of the report. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Max leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a second. Official. Rowan was his son. The emotion hit twice as hard because he'd just lived through the moment where it felt like he might lose everything. "Congratulations, Max," Griffith said, his voice warmer than usual. "Now we can start the legal process. With this result, we can file for emergency temporary custody. If the judge rules in our favor, maybe in 2 weeks." 2 weeks is still a long time," Max said softly, his eyes still locked on the paper. He walked out of the lab and pulled out his phone, calling Pax at once. His voice turned sharp again, decisive and cold. "Security around St. Francis. Now. Discreet. 24/7. No one knows why. No one asks questions. My son is in there." Pax didn't need anything more. "Understood, boss. I'll have a team in place within the hour." The protective instinct in Max had fully activated. Rowan was now the most precious thing in his life, but at the same time, he was also the most dangerous weakness. In Max's world, having someone you loved meant having something to lose, and having something to lose meant giving an enemy a place to strike. That afternoon, Max went to St. Francis Orphanage with the test results in his hand. He asked to speak with Sister Agnes privately. When the office door closed, he placed the paper on her desk. "It's true, Sister. Rowan is my son." The nun picked up the results and read them with eyes already blurred by tears. "What a blessing," she said, her voice thick. "He always knew somehow. He always said his father would come for him." "Can I keep visiting him every day?" Max asked. "Of course. In fact, it'd be wonderful for him to bond with you before the transition. But can I tell him?" "Not yet, Sister. I want to wait until the legal process is further along. I don't want to raise his hopes only to have them crushed by some bureaucratic problem." Sister Agnes nodded and dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her handkerchief. "I understand. It'll be our secret for now." Max stood and looked out the window toward the playground, where Rowan was sitting alone on a low bench, drawing. His son. Those 2 words still felt so new they were almost unreal, yet so certain nothing could shake them. From that day on, Max reorganized his entire schedule. He arrived at the office at 6 o'clock in the morning, handled the most urgent matters before noon, then spent the entire afternoon at St. Francis Orphanage with Rowan. His life split into 2 halves that couldn't have been more opposite. In the morning, Max sat in a dark conference room under dim golden light, making cold decisions in a voice no one dared to challenge. In the afternoon, that same man sat flat on the tiled floor of the recreation room, holding a blue crayon and coloring in the sky of the castle drawing Rowan was finishing. They played together, drew together, did homework together. Max quickly discovered that Rowan wasn't an ordinary child. The boy read and wrote far better than most 9-year-olds. He loved math and could solve problems that most kids his age still couldn't even understand. His imagination was astonishingly rich, always inventing adventure stories about knights and castles in the clouds. "Why do you come to see me every day?" Rowan asked one Thursday afternoon, as they sat side by side on the floor. "Because I really enjoy your company," Max said. "You make me happy." Rowan tilted his head, studying him with those green eyes. "You're different from other adults who come here." "Different how?" "They talk to me like I'm a baby. They use silly voices and say things like, 'Oh, how cute.' You talk to me like I'm a real person." Max smiled. "Because you're smart, and because I respect you." "What does respect mean?" Rowan asked, looking up with genuine curiosity. "It's treating someone the way they deserve, with care, with attention, and by considering what they think and feel." Rowan went quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "My mom respected me too. She always asked my opinion on things, even when I was tiny. She'd say, 'What do you think, Rowan?' even when I was too little to answer properly." Every time Rowan mentioned his mother, Max felt an arrow go straight through his chest, but he didn't avoid those conversations. He knew Rowan needed to talk about Vivienne, and he needed to listen. On another afternoon, when they were sitting outside in the yard, under the shade of a maple tree, Rowan suddenly asked, "Did you really know my mom?" Max chose his words carefully. "Yes, I did. She was the sweetest, most caring person I've ever met in my life." "Why didn't you stay together?" Max looked down at his hands. The hands that had once held Vivienne's in Chicago winter nights, that had once smoothed her hair when she fell asleep against his shoulder. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, Rowan, and by the time I realized I'd made mine, it was already too late to fix it." "But do you miss her?" "Every single day." Rowan told Max more small fragments of memory about Vivienne. She used to make pancakes on Saturday mornings and always added extra blueberries on top. She liked to hum softly while she washed dishes. She had the habit of reading before bed and always kept the nightlight on because she was afraid of the dark. Every detail matched Max's memories perfectly. Every sentence a quiet confirmation that this boy truly was his son, a living piece of Vivienne he'd thought he'd lost forever. The days passed. They played with robots, built puzzles, drew pictures. Max listened as Rowan talked about his friends at the orphanage, about the math teacher he liked, about the books he'd read. He sat through every story, long or short, with steady patience, and Rowan slowly opened up to him in a way he hadn't with anyone else since his mother died. That afternoon, when Max stood to leave, Rowan suddenly grabbed his hand. Not a light hold, a tight grip with both small hands, as if he was afraid that if he let go, Max would vanish the way every other adult in his life had. "I don't want you to leave," Rowan said, his voice small but shaking in a way that was impossible to miss. Max dropped to one knee, so he was eye level with the boy. He rested a hand on Rowan's shoulder and looked straight into those green eyes. "I'll always come back, Rowan. Every single day. I promise you that." Rowan stared at him for a long time, as if weighing whether he should believe him. Then he gave a small nod and let go. Max walked out into the yard, where Pax was waiting, leaning against the iron gate. But Pax wasn't looking at Max. His eyes were fixed on the recreation room window. A few minutes earlier, through that glass, Pax had seen something he'd never imagined he'd witness. Max Harrington, the man the entire Chicago underworld feared. The phantom whose name could make even the toughest men lower their heads, sitting flat on the tiled floor of an orphanage, holding out his arm so a 7-year-old boy could draw on his skin with crayons. And Max was smiling. Pax turned his face away and looked out at the quiet street. A brief smile flickered across the hard, familiar lines of his face, a smile no one had seen in 15 years. He thought, quietly, that the boy inside had just done what no one in this world had ever been able to do. He'd made the phantom smile. That night, Max called Griffith from his private office in the penthouse. "My apartment isn't suitable for a child. I need a house." Griffith replied that he could renovate the current penthouse to make it appropriate, that moving wasn't legally necessary. But Max had already decided. "No, I want a real home. A house with a backyard, his own room, a place where he can actually be a kid, not a penthouse in the sky where he can't even touch the grass." The next day, Max started house hunting. In 3 days, He toured 15 properties in the best parts of Chicago. From sprawling mansions in Winnetka to luxurious condos in Streeterville, nothing made him stop. Until he walked into a 3-story townhouse on a quiet street in Lincoln Park. The home had a generous backyard with a green lawn, a small pool just right for kids, a cozy library on the second floor, and a room on the top level overlooking the crown of an old maple tree that Max knew instantly would be Rowan's room. He bought the house with cash that same day and hired an interior designer who specialized in children's spaces. "I want something adventurous but warm," Max told her, "like the castles he draws. Not over the top, but magical. The kind of room a 7-year-old boy would walk into and feel like he stepped inside his own imagination. You have 2 weeks to get everything ready. It's for my son. He's coming to live with me." The designer nodded and got to work immediately. Rowan's room slowly took shape. Navy-painted walls with subtle golden details. A captain's bed with wooden rails. Bookshelves running along the wall packed with children's books and adventure stories. A desk by the window stocked with crayons, drawing paper, and every school supply anyone could think of. And a warm reading nook with soft pillows piled into a small nest under gentle yellow light. But Max wasn't only thinking about comfort. He had the most advanced security system money could buy installed. Surveillance cameras covered every corner outside the house, motion sensors on the doors and every window, an alarm system linked directly to Pax's phone, and a hidden safe room behind a bookcase on the second floor, built strong enough to withstand anything. Pax personally checked the entire neighborhood. He walked every alley, noted every entrance and exit, watched the neighbors' routines, and placed discreet guards on a 24/7 rotation. "No one gets near this house without my knowing," Pax told Max when he gave his report. Max nodded. It was the bare minimum. But on the afternoon of the 3rd day after buying the house, as Max had just left St. Francis Orphanage after spending the afternoon playing with Rowan, Pax drove with a heavier silence than usual. Max noticed immediately. "What is it?" Pax glanced in the rearview mirror, then said, "We've got eyes on us, boss. Holloway's people." Max's expression didn't change. "How long?" "They've been watching the orphanage for 2 days. 2 cars. 4 men. They rotate shifts, but I recognize 2 of them. Trent Holloway's crew. Trent Holloway." The name dropped the temperature in the car by a few degrees. Holloway was Max's biggest rival in Chicago's underworld, the only one still bold enough to challenge the Phantom's territory. And now he was curious about why Max kept showing up at an orphanage. "Don't touch them yet," Max said, calm, his voice cold as steel. "Let them watch. I want to know exactly how much Holloway knows before I move." Pax nodded. He understood. In this world, moving too fast was the quickest way to expose a weakness, and now Max had a weakness he'd never had before. That night, Max stood in the room that would become Rowan's. The walls were painted, the bed assembled, the bookshelves still being built. He looked out the window, where streetlights shone through the leaves of the old maple tree. This was the price of the life he'd chosen. Loving someone meant turning them into a target. Wanting to protect someone meant admitting there was something an enemy could aim at. Vivian had understood that before he did. She'd seen the truth behind the glamour and decided to run to protect the child she was carrying. She'd been right to be afraid. But this time would be different. Max clenched his hands, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. Holloway could watch all he wanted. But if he dared take one more step toward Rowan, he'd understand why people called Max the Phantom. This time, Max wouldn't let history repeat itself. On an ordinary afternoon like any other, Max was sitting beside Rowan on a wooden bench in the orphanage yard. Rowan had just finished a new drawing and was coloring in the flowers in the garden of his imaginary castle. All at once, the boy set his crayon down and turned to Max with an expression that was unusually serious. "Can I tell you a secret?" Max looked at him, his heart tightening slightly because he didn't know what was coming. "Of course. You can tell me anything." Rowan lowered his head, turning a red crayon over and over in his fingers as if he was gathering enough courage. Then he spoke, his voice small but clear. "I pretend that you're my dad when I'm alone in my room at night. I make believe that you live here with me and that we have breakfast together every morning. And when the other kids ask about my dad, I tell them he comes to visit me every single day." Max felt his breath stop. The boy hadn't said anything sad. He'd said the sweetest thing and the most heartbreaking thing Max had ever heard in his life. "And what is that like?" Max asked, trying to keep his voice normal even as his throat tightened. Really good, Rowan said, his eyes lighting up. You help me brush my teeth in the morning. You tell me adventure stories before bed. And every night you give me a goodnight fist bump instead of a kiss because that's what cool dads do. The boy looked down, his small shoulders drawing in slightly. I know it's just pretend, but it makes me feel less alone. Max swallowed hard. He looked at Rowan, a 7-year-old child who'd built an imaginary world just to feel loved, and in that world, Max was the father the boy had chosen. He couldn't hide the truth for one more day. Rowan, what if that were true? What if I really was your dad? Rowan lifted his face. His green eyes widened, holding a fragile spark of hope he was trying not to let flare too brightly, afraid it might be extinguished. It would be the best day of my whole entire life. Max drew a deep breath. Rowan, I need to tell you something very important. Do you know about DNA tests? When doctors run tests to see if two people are related? Rowan nodded slowly. I know. The teacher explained that in science class. It's like a special code inside your body that tells you who your family is. That's right. I took one of those tests to see if we are related. Rowan's heart started beating faster. Max could see the small chest rising and falling under the gray t-shirt. And? What did it say? It said that I am your dad, Rowan. Your real dad. Silence. The longest moment in the whole story. The world seemed to stop turning. The sound of children playing on the other side of the yard disappeared. The birds singing in the maple tree disappeared. There were only a father and a son staring at each other across a few inches that felt like 7 years. Then Rowan began to cry. Not the crying of sadness. Not the crying of fear. The crying of absolute joy. Pure and unfiltered. The kind of joy only a 7-year-old who had just found his father could feel. For real? You're my real dad? For real, for real? For real. That's why you reminded me of someone special the first time I saw you. Because you are my son, Rowan, and I love you more than anything in this world. Rowan threw himself into Max's arms with a force no one would have expected from a small, thin boy. He wrapped his arms around Max's neck, pressed his face into the shoulder of the expensive suit, and his tears soaked the fabric, but neither of them cared. I knew it, Rowan sobbed. I knew you were special. From the very first day you walked in. I knew it. Why did it take so long to find me? Because I didn't know you existed, son. But now that I know, I'll never leave you alone again. And in that moment, what had never happened before, happened. Maxfield Harrington, the coldest mafia boss in Chicago, the man his enemies didn't dare look in the eye, the phantom whose name alone made the underworld tremble, was crying. Crying for real. No hiding it, no holding it back. Tears slid down that iron-hard face while the 7-year-old boy held him as if letting go might turn it all into a dream. 7 years of absence, that hadn't been a choice, melted in that embrace. 7 years of loneliness. 7 years of guilt he hadn't known he carried. 7 years this child had waited. All of it poured into one single hug in the yard of an orphanage on a June afternoon. When the tears had eased, Rowan lifted his face, eyes red and swollen, but his smile bright. Does this mean I'm going to live with you? Max wiped his son's tears away with his thumb. I'm getting a beautiful house ready for us, with a special room just for you. It's like the castles you draw, with a captain's bed, shelves full of books, and a desk with every crayon and pencil you could ever want. Rowan's eyes went wide. Really? A room just for me? Just for you. To decorate however you want. And will you sleep there too? I'll be in the room right next to yours. Forever. Rowan hugged Max again, this time softer, calmer, the hug of a child who'd finally found where he belonged. On Tuesday, the social worker, Miss Jolene Crawford, came to inspect the new house in Lincoln Park. 2 hours before she arrived, Max personally checked every room, one by one. The hidden safe room behind the bookcase on the 2nd floor had been locked with its own private code and disguised perfectly behind thick encyclopedia volumes. Every trace connected to his old world had been put away or removed. On paper, Max Harrington was the CEO of Harrington Holdings, a legitimate real estate and restaurant conglomerate. No one knew anything else, and Max was going to keep it that way. Miss Crawford was a woman of about 45, with sharp eyes and a blunt, straightforward way of speaking. She walked through each room, taking careful notes, checking the kitchen, the living room, the backyard, and she lingered for quite a while in Rowan's room. "This is a beautiful home, Mr. Harrington," she said, looking around the Navy room with the captain's bed and the bookshelves running along the wall. I can see you've prepared very thoughtfully. The only thing missing is his drawings, Max said. I want him to decorate it however he likes. This is his room, not mine. Miss Crawford nodded and wrote a few more lines. She asked about schooling plans, about childcare when Max was at work, about how he planned to balance his job and being a father. Max answered each question clearly and with certainty. He'd cut back his work hours. He'd hired a nanny named Carla Nguyen with excellent experience and an outstanding record, and he'd chosen St. Martha School close to the house. When she left, Miss Crawford shook Max's hand and said, I'll be writing a very positive report. You've clearly taken this responsibility seriously. On Thursday night, the evening before the hearing, Max went to St. Francis Orphanage one last time as a visitor. As he walked through the iron gate, Rowan ran out from the courtyard, his face bright. Dad! The call rang out across the yard. A few nuns turned and smiled. Max caught Rowan in his arms and lifted him. Hey, buddy. How was your day? Good. But I was counting the hours until you came. They sat side by side on the familiar wooden bench in the yard. Max explained to Rowan that tomorrow they would meet a judge, someone who would decide whether Rowan could go home with him or not. Rowan listened, his green eyes more serious than any 7-year-old's should be. What if he says no? Max placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Then we wait a little longer and try again. But I want you to know one thing, Rowan. Nothing in this world, no judge, no law, no one, changes the fact that you are my son. That is true today. It'll be true tomorrow, and it'll be true forever. Rowan nodded and hugged Max one more time before Max left. That night, neither of them could sleep. On Friday morning, Max arrived at the Cook County Courthouse at 8 o'clock, wearing the finest dark gray suit he owned, a navy tie Rowan had once said. It matches my room, and perfectly polished Oxford shoes. Dr. Warren Griffith was waiting at the entrance, a thick file in hand, his expression confident but focused. Relax, Max. We have everything in our favor. The DNA results, the excellent social report, your financial stability, and most importantly, the obvious bond between you and Rowan. Outside the courthouse, parked 2 rows away, Pax sat in the black SUV with an earpiece in. His eyes swept the parking lot, tracking every car that came and went, every person walking past the courthouse entrance. 2 other guards stood at opposite corners of the building, blending into the crowd, but their eyes never stopped watching. Even at the courthouse, in broad daylight, the protective habit never turned off. Sister Agnes arrived with Rowan 10 minutes later. The boy wore the white button-down shirt and dark blue slacks Max had bought him the week before. His hair was neatly combed to the side, and his green eyes lit up when he saw Max. Dad! Rowan ran down the hallway and launched himself into Max's arms. How are you feeling, buddy? Nervous, but happy. Do you think the judge is going to like me? Max smiled. It's impossible not to like you. You're perfect. The hearing was held in a small, welcoming room designed specifically for cases involving children. Judge Harold Whitmore, a man of about 55 with a kind face and sharp eyes, sat behind an oak desk. He read through the file, then turned to Rowan with a gentle voice. Rowan, do you know why we're here today? Yes, Your Honor. To decide if I can go live with my dad. And do you want to go live with Mr. Harrington? I really do. He's the coolest dad in the whole wide world. He plays with me every day, teaches me new things, and he bought me a tablet so I can draw whenever I want. The judge smiled. And how do you know he's your father? Rowan went quiet for a moment, as if he was searching for exactly the right words for something he felt deep inside. Then he said, Because when I look at him, I feel like I'm home. And because his eyes look just like mine. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Whitmore turned to Max and asked about the responsibility he was taking on, about his plan to balance work with fatherhood, about the school he'd chosen, and most importantly, about how he planned to preserve Vivian's memory in Rowan's life. Max answered every question with steady certainty and honest sincerity, without needing to prepare, because this wasn't a script. This was his life. After reviewing everything, Judge Whitmore said, I find that Mr. Maxfield Harrington has demonstrated not only biological paternity, but also a genuine and deep commitment to this child's well-being. I hereby grant the petition for permanent custody. Rowan leaped up from his chair and threw himself into Max. We did it, Dad. We did it! Max held his son tight. His jaw clenched, his eyes burned, His hand trembled slightly on Rowan's back, but he didn't cry. Not here. Not in front of the judge, the attorney, and strangers. The instinct of a man who'd controlled his emotions in public his entire life held him steady. Just enough, but the smile on his mouth couldn't be hidden. "Congratulations to you both," Sister Agnes said. Her eyes read too. "Rowan, now you have what you've always wanted." 7 years of absence that had never been a choice officially ended in that small, welcoming room. On a Friday morning in July, at the Cook County Courthouse, in the city of Chicago. 1 hour after the hearing, Max was already at St. Francis Orphanage to help Rowan pack his things. The small room Rowan had lived in for the last 2 years didn't hold much to take. A few outfits folded neatly into an old backpack. The faded toy robot named Max. A stack of drawings carefully held together with a rubber band, and 3 thin books with worn spines. Max looked at that tiny pile of belongings and felt his chest tighten. "Is that everything?" he asked. Rowan looked around the room one last time, then turned back to Max. "That's really it, but it doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because now I have the most important thing." "What's the most important thing?" "You, Dad. Now I have you." Sister Agnes stood in the doorway, dabbing at her eyes with the corner of her handkerchief. She hugged Rowan for a long time and whispered something into his ear. Rowan nodded, hugged her once more, then took Max's hand and walked out. In the Rolls-Royce, Rowan sat in the back seat with the child safety seatbelt Max had installed the week before. The whole drive from Little Village to Lincoln Park, the boy never stopped talking. He talked about his friends at the orphanage, the new drawing he wanted to finish, the food he wanted to try, the cartoon he liked. "Dad, can I call you Dad forever?" "Always, son. Forever." "And will you pick me up from school every day?" "Every day that I can. And when I can't, Auntie Carla will pick you up. She's a really nice person who's going to help us." "Is she nice like Sister Agnes?" "Very nice. You'll like her." When the car turned onto a quiet street in Lincoln Park and stopped in front of the 3-story townhouse, Rowan froze on the sidewalk. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. He stared at the house with the blooming front garden, the big oak door, and the warm light glowing from the windows. "Is this where we're going to live?" "It's our home, Rowan. Yours and mine." "Our home," the boy repeated, tasting each word on his lips as if it were the sweetest thing he'd ever been given. "I've never had a home of my own before." Max lifted Rowan into his arms and carried him over the threshold. "Now you do, and you will forever." Before he walked Rowan through the house, Max stepped into each room one pace ahead. His eyes swept quickly over the windows, the blind corners, the exits. Pax had already checked the whole house. Everything was secure. But the habit of a man who'd lived his whole life in the underworld never vanished. Only when he was sure everything was fine did he take Rowan's hand and begin the tour. The spacious living room with a large television and a soft couch. The kitchen with granite counters where Rowan could help cook. The backyard with a green lawn, a swing set, and a small playhouse painted in bright colors. Rowan ran from room to room, eyes wide, his voice bursting out in constant amazement. "And now," Max said, stopping in front of a door decorated with golden stars, "let's see your room." When the door opened, Rowan couldn't speak. The navy walls with gold details, the captain's bed with wooden rails, the bookshelves along the wall packed with adventure stories, the desk by the window with crayons and drawing paper stacked neatly, the reading nook with soft pillows under warm yellow light, and the toys lined up in order on the shelves. "Is it all mine?" Rowan whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the dream. "All yours. To decorate however you want, mess up however you want, and be happy however you want." Rowan ran to the bed and jumped onto it. "It's the softest bed in the whole entire world," Max laughed. That night, Max cooked the first dinner for the two of them, mac and cheese with fresh vegetables. Rowan insisted on helping, climbing onto a stool to reach the sink, stirring the cheese with a wooden spoon almost as big as his arm. After dinner, Max helped Rowan bathe in a tub full of bubbles and rubber ducks. Rowan laughed so hard water splashed across the bathroom floor, and Max, the man who always wore a perfect suit without a single wrinkle, sat there in a soaked shirt, laughing more than he'd laughed in 8 years. After that, Max tried to brush Rowan's hair. The result was a messy mop that looked even worse than before, but they looked at each other in the mirror and burst out laughing. At bedtime, Max read 3 adventure books. Rowan chose one about pirates, one about knights, and one about a space explorer. When the last one ended, Rowan lay in the captain's bed, eyes heavy, but his mouth still smiling. Dad? Yeah, buddy? You're my happy ending. My hero who came to find me. Max smoothed his son's hair. You're the one who saved me, Rowan. I was very lost before I found you. But now neither of us is lost anymore, right? Never again. Rowan closed his eyes, and Max stayed beside him until the boy's breathing settled into an even rhythm. Max stood, turned off the light, left the star-shaped nightlight projecting onto the ceiling, and gently closed the door. But around 2 o'clock in the morning, Max jolted awake to the sound of crying from the next room. He rushed into Rowan's room within seconds. The boy was curled up on the bed, tears all over his face, trembling, both hands gripping the blanket. Hey, what happened, buddy? I'm right here. Rowan looked at Max with panicked eyes. I had a dream that you disappeared, like Mom. I woke up and the room was dark and I didn't know where I was and I thought maybe it wasn't real. Maybe I'm still at the orphanage. Maybe all of this is just a dream. Max sat on the bed and pulled his son into his arms. Feel my heartbeat? He placed Rowan's hand on his chest. Can you feel it? Rowan nodded, tears still sliding down. I'm right here, son. This is real. This is our home. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, I'll still be here. Rowan gripped Max's shirt with both hands. Don't go. Please. Stay here tonight. Max lay down beside his son in the captain's bed and pulled the blanket up over both of them. I'm not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever. Rowan curled into Max's arms, his head resting on Max's chest, and slowly fell asleep again. The boy's breathing evened out. His small hands loosened little by little, but they still held onto a corner of Max's shirt. Max stayed awake until morning. He watched his son's face in sleep, peaceful, trusting, and so fragile it made Max's heart ache. When the first sunlight slipped through the curtains, Max eased himself out of bed. He walked to Rowan's backpack and took out the photograph of Vivian that he'd quietly tucked inside the day before. He placed it on Rowan's bedside shelf, right beside the toy robot named Max, in the spot the boy would see first when he opened his eyes each morning. He didn't say anything. He didn't whisper. He didn't promise. He simply set the photograph down and stood there, watching his son sleep for a little longer, because there are moments when silence is stronger than any promise. The first days in the new house passed in small moments, the kind both father and son were learning to grow into. Max learned how to cook for a 7-year-old. Rowan learned how to trust that when he woke up each morning, everything would still be real. On an early weeknight, while Max stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of mac and cheese for dinner, Rowan sat on a stool by the counter, feet swinging, watching Max with an unusually thoughtful expression. Dad, can I ask you something? You can always ask me anything, buddy. Why didn't Mommy ever tell me about you? Max stopped stirring. The question didn't surprise him. He'd known it was coming, but it still hurt. He set the wooden spoon down and turned to his son. I think she was scared, buddy. Sometimes grown-ups get scared that things won't work out, and they end up making decisions that they regret later. But what was she scared of? She was scared that I wouldn't be able to keep you safe. And she loved you so much that she'd rather do everything alone than take that risk. Rowan thought about that answer for a long time. Were you angry at her? No, Max said, his voice gentle but certain. Sad. Very sad. But not angry. Your mom loved you more than anything in this world, Rowan. Everything she did because she thought it was best for you. Rowan nodded slowly, as if the answer had filled a space he'd carried inside for a long time. Then the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out something tiny. It was a piece of paper folded into quarters, so old it was nearly torn along the creases, the edges yellowed with age. Rowan held it in his small palm and offered it to Max. Mom left this in my jacket pocket. I've kept it since I was really little. I don't understand all the words. Can you read it for me? Max took the paper in both hands. He unfolded it carefully, afraid it might rip. Inside, in handwriting so familiar it made his heart miss a beat, was Vivian's script, slanted, soft, the end of each line faintly shaky, as if she'd written while fighting back tears. When you find him, tell him I'm sorry, and that I never stopped loving him. Max stared at the note. His hands were shaking, the words blurred in front of him. Not because the ink had faded, but because something was rising in his chest, something he had to force down with all his strength. Vivian had written this for Rowan. She'd left it in her son's jacket pocket, in a place the boy would find one day. She'd known that one day Rowan would find his father. She hadn't been running forever. This note, and the letter the police found in her car that had never been mailed, were telling the same story. Vivian had been on her way back, she'd decided, but fate hadn't given her enough time. "What does it say, Dad?" Rowan asked softly. Max swallowed, drew a deep breath, and read it aloud for him. "It says, when you find him, tell him I'm sorry, and that I never stopped loving him. Him means you, right?" "Yes, buddy, it means me. So Mommy wanted me to find you?" "She did. She always did." Max set the note down on the counter with careful hands, then pulled Rowan into his arms. "Your mom was the bravest person I ever knew, Rowan. Don't ever forget that." Rowan wrapped his arms around Max's neck and gave a small nod, and they sat like that for a long while in the quiet kitchen, the mac and cheese simmering gently on the stove, warm yellow light falling over them as if the outside world didn't exist. From that night on, Max and Rowan's life began to form its own rhythm. They woke up at 7 o'clock every morning. Max made pancakes, and Rowan stood beside him, supervising with the stern eyes of a tiny chef. "Dad, you have to put blueberries on top." "Mom always put blueberries on top. That's the rule." "I didn't know there were rules for pancakes." "There are, and this is the most important one." Max laughed and sprinkled blueberries on each pancake exactly the way Rowan demanded. It was Rowan's way of keeping his mother alive in daily routines, and Max respected that from the bottom of his heart. After breakfast, Max drove Rowan to St. Martha's School. The principal, Mrs. Pemberton, a warm, understanding woman, promised she'd support Rowan through the transition with everything she had, and Rowan adapted faster than anyone expected. He made friends almost immediately, especially with a boy his age named Jasper, who also loved drawing and had an imagination just as big. "Dad, can I invite Jasper over to play?" Rowan asked on his third day of school. "Of course. Our house is your house, and your friends are always welcome." Every afternoon, Max left the office at 3 o'clock, having handed most responsibilities to his associates, and came home to Rowan, who couldn't wait to tell him about the school day. "Today I learned about volcanoes. Did you know there's a volcano that can shoot lava 800 feet into the air? And I also learned how to do long division. Want me to teach you?" Max loved that excitement. The boy was genuinely curious about everything. He asked smart questions and absorbed knowledge like a sponge. Friday became their special day, their adventure day. They went to the movies, to Millennium Park, to the Lincoln Park Zoo, to the Art Institute, where Rowan stood in front of huge paintings and said that one day his own art would hang here too. On the way home after an afternoon at Navy Pier, Rowan looked out the car window, eyes sparkling with the reflection of the city lights. "Dad, is this our city?" "It sure is, buddy. And there's so much more cool stuff for us to discover." Rowan smiled and rested his head against the glass. "When I grow up, I want to see the whole world with you. Then let's start planning our trips right now." In the weeks that followed, Max began quietly reshaping the power structure he'd built over nearly 2 decades. One by one, pieces of the underground operation were handed off to trusted lieutenants. One by one, ties to the shadow world were cut loose or converted into legitimate business relationships. Max kept Harrington Holdings, the restaurants, the real estate projects, everything that looked clean on paper. The rest, he was letting go, little by little. Pax noticed the change before anyone else did. One morning, when the two of them were in Max's private office in the Loop, Pax watched Max sign the transfer papers for one of the last remaining operations and said, "You're changing, boss." Max didn't look up. "I have a son now, Pax. Everything changes." Pax nodded and didn't say another word. He understood. In their world, having a family meant having a reason to step out, and Max was stepping out. But the underworld wasn't a place that let anyone leave quietly. On a Wednesday afternoon, when Max came home after picking Rowan up from school, he saw a white envelope placed on the front step. No stamp, no return address, only a handwritten line on the front. "For Mr. Harrington. Personal." Max told Rowan to go inside first. "Go put your backpack in your room, buddy. I'll be right in." When the door closed behind Rowan, Max picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a photograph. A photo of Rowan walking out of the gate at St. Martha's School, backpack on his shoulders, eyes down on the sidewalk, unaware that someone was taking his picture from across the street. On the back of the photo, in handwriting Max recognized instantly, was a line from Trent Holloway. Nice kid. Shame if something happened to his routine. Max stared at the photograph, stared at his son's face in that image, stared at the threat written on the back. And in that moment, anyone who expected Max Harrington to explode, slam a fist into the wall, roar, or storm out with a gun in his hand would have been completely disappointed, because Max did none of those things. He was perfectly calm, colder than ice. He set the photograph down on the console table by the front door. He breathed evenly, slowly. Then he took out his phone and called Pax. Come to the house, now. 15 minutes later, Pax stood in Max's private office on the second floor. The door shut tight. Max showed him the photo and the message. Pax read it, jaw clenched. He looked up at Max, and in that moment, Pax saw something he'd seen only twice in 15 years at Max's side. It was in Max's eyes. Not anger, not worry, the look of absolute stillness, the stillness of a man who'd made a final decision and couldn't be moved by anything in this world. The 2 previous times Pax had seen that look, the men who received it never showed up in Chicago again. Max said only 3 words. Activate everything. Tonight. Pax slipped the photograph into the inside pocket of his jacket. Understood, boss. Then he left. That night, Max read to Rowan, brushed his hair, and put him to bed like any other night. He sat by Rowan's bedside until the boy's breathing turned steady. Then he went downstairs, sat in his office with the lights off, and waited. His phone stayed silent all night. No calls, no texts. The silence itself was the answer. The next morning, while Max was making pancakes for Rowan in the kitchen, the morning news played on the television. The reporter announced that businessman Trent Holloway had abruptly left Chicago for good the night before. His entire business operation was in the process of being dissolved. His closest associates had also left the city. No one knew the exact reason. No one knew what had happened overnight. Dad, who's that man on TV? Rowan asked, looking up from his plate. Max turned the TV off and smiled. Nobody important, buddy. Eat your pancakes before they get cold. 10 minutes later, Max's phone vibrated once. A text from Pax. Brief. He won't be a problem anymore, boss. Ever. Max read it, deleted it, and set his phone face down on the table. He looked over at Rowan, carefully placing each blueberry onto the last pancake in neat rows, green eyes focused, dark hair slightly messy from sleep, completely unaware of the storm that had swept through the city overnight and disappeared before sunrise. Max watched his son and thought silently, "You'll never know this dark side of me, Rowan. You'll never have to. But I'll burn this whole world down before I let anyone touch you." That afternoon, Max called a meeting. Not at Harrington Holdings' office. At a private location only the closest inner circle knew. He met with each loyal subordinate, one by one, and delivered his final decision. Every remaining underground operation would be transferred immediately, not gradually, not step by step. Right now. From this point on, Harrington Holdings would be a purely legitimate business empire. No more hidden conference room behind a false wall. No more midnight calls. No more unmarked envelopes with no return address. The Phantom disappeared from Chicago's underworld. Not because an enemy defeated him, not because the law came for him, but because a 7-year-old boy was sitting at a kitchen table, lining blueberries on pancakes, and calling him Dad. 1 month after the day Rowan officially came home, Max hosted a special party at the house in Lincoln Park. He invited Rowan's classmates from St. Martha School, a few staff members from St. Francis Orphanage who'd cared for Rowan for 2 years, Sister Agnes, and even a magician who specialized in children's shows. The backyard was decorated with balloons in every color. A long table covered with a white cloth was piled high with sweets and fruit juice, and a small speaker played cheerful music. When Rowan ran downstairs that morning and saw the backyard transformed into a party, he turned to Max with wide eyes. "But it's not my birthday, Dad." Max crouched down to his son's level and smiled. "It's not your birthday. It's our family's birthday. The day we officially celebrate becoming father and son." The party turned out better than anything Max could have imagined. Rowan laughed until he couldn't breathe when the magician turned a handkerchief into a stuffed bunny, then made a coin vanish from Jasper's hand, leaving the boy shouting in amazement. The kids raced across the backyard, played hide-and-seek in the little playhouse, and fought over the swing set, their laughter echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Sister Agnes stood beside Max, watching Rowan play in the middle of his friends. "He's a completely different child," she said. "I've never seen him this happy. He deserves every bit of it, sister. But the gift Rowan loved most wasn't the magician or the cake. It was a photo album Max had spent an entire week preparing. When most of the guests had gone, and only the two of them were left on the living room sofa, Max handed Rowan a brown leather album. This is a special gift. It's photos of your mom when she was young, so you can see what she was like before you were born. Rowan opened the album with hands so gentle, it was like he was holding a treasure. The first page was a photo of Vivienne at about 20, standing by Lake Michigan, wind blowing her hair across her face, her smile bright. Rowan touched the picture lightly with one finger. She was so beautiful, he whispered. He turned page after page, pausing at every photo, studying his mother in different moments. Vivienne reading in a cafe, Vivienne laughing at someone just outside the frame, Vivienne standing by a Christmas tree, holding a small gift box, her eyes catching the glow of the lights. And she was always smiling, Rowan said, his voice both happy and sad. She was, Max said, just like you make me smile every single day. Rowan hugged the album to his chest. Can I keep this in my room? Of course. It's yours. And whenever you want to talk about your mom, I'll tell you everything I remember about her. Let's play a little game for those of you still watching. Drop the word heart in the comments. Only those who made it this far will truly understand. Let's continue with the story. That night, after every balloon had deflated and every scrap of wrapping paper had been cleaned up, the two of them sat side by side on the back steps, looking up at Chicago's night sky. The city lights washed out most of the stars, but a few of the brightest still glittered above the old maple tree. Rowan was quiet for a long time, longer than usual, and Max knew his son was thinking about something important. Dad, can I ask you a really serious question? You can always ask me anything, buddy. Rowan looked at Max with serious eyes, and for a moment, he seemed much older than 7. Do you regret finding me? Your life changed so much because of me. Max didn't answer right away, not because he needed to think, but because hearing that question from a 7-year-old made him realize his son had been carrying this worry for a long time. Too afraid to ask, he pulled Rowan into his arms, let the boy lean back against his chest, and spoke slowly, clearly, letting every word sink in. Rowan, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Before I found you, I had money. I had power. I had everything that people think matters. But I didn't have a family. I didn't have anyone to come home to. I didn't have anyone to make pancakes for on Saturday morning. You taught me what it means to be truly happy, and I wouldn't trade a single second of this life for anything I had before. Max's eyes grew hot. He swallowed hard. His hand tightened on Rowan's shoulder. But he didn't cry. Not yet. Rowan rested his head against Max's chest, looking up at the sky through the leaves. I learned what happy means too, Dad, he said, his voice light as breath. It's having a dad who really loves me. They sat like that for a long time, father and son under the stars, in the house they both called home, and Max understood that everything he'd given up, every ounce of power, every underground empire, every year spent living in the dark, it had all been worth it just to have this moment. 6 months after Rowan came home, Max sat in the parent conference room at St. Martha School, across from Mrs. Pemberton. The principal beamed, Rowan's file open on the table. Mr. Harrington, I have to tell you that Rowan is one of the brightest students I've ever had in my career. He's smart, creative, incredibly sociable, and so kind with his classmates. The other children adore him. How is he adjusting emotionally? Max asked. Perfectly. He's a well-balanced, happy child. He talks about you all the time, always with so much pride, and he's made wonderful friends, especially Jasper. Those two are inseparable. Then Mrs. Pemberton opened a folder and pulled out a drawing. I want to show you something. Rowan drew this in art class last week. She placed the drawing on the table. Max looked down and felt his throat tighten. It was a crayon drawing, vivid and astonishingly detailed for a 7-year-old. At the bottom was a big house with a garden full of flowers. In front of the door, a tall man in black was holding the hand of a small boy in blue. They were both smiling, and above them, in a bright blue sky, was a long-haired woman with white wings, smiling down at the two of them. When I asked him about the drawing, Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice thickening slightly, he said, "It's my dad, me, and my mom who turned into an angel to protect us from up in heaven." Max stared at the drawing for a long time, his fingertip resting lightly on the winged woman in the sky. He handles his mother's absence incredibly well, Mrs. Pemberton continued. He doesn't show sadness. On the contrary, he always says his mom is happy in heaven because she knows he's being well taken care of. Max brought the drawing home and put it on the refrigerator with a star-shaped magnet. That night, when the two of them were sitting on Rowan's bed after story time, Max mentioned it. "Your teacher showed me your family drawing today. It's really beautiful." Rowan smiled. "Did you really like it? I wanted to draw Mommy too, because even though she's not here, she's still part of our family. Of course she is. She always will be." Rowan looked at Vivian's photograph on his bedside shelf, the photo Max had placed there on the first night. "Dad, can I tell you another secret?" "You always can. Sometimes I talk to Mom before I go to sleep. I tell her how my day was. I tell her about school, about Jasper, about the pancakes we made, and I thank her for making me and for making you find me." Max swallowed hard. "And what do you think she says?" Rowan smiled and looked up at the ceiling as if he could see through it. "I think she gets really happy, and she says she loves me, and that she likes you a lot too." Max smoothed his son's hair. "I think you're right, buddy. I think she does." Then, on a weekend morning, while Max sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, Rowan came running down the stairs with a stack of papers pressed tight to his chest, face shining like he'd found treasure. "Dad, sit right there. Don't move. And close your eyes." Max set his coffee down and closed his eyes, a small smile on his mouth. "Okay, they're closed. No peeking, no peeking, I promise." He heard small feet rushing closer, the soft rustle of paper, and then Rowan spoke in the most serious voice a 7-year-old could manage. "Okay, open your eyes." Max opened them. Rowan stood in front of him, holding up a 10-page stack of paper, carefully stapled together. The cover was colored in elaborate crayon designs, with neat, clear handwriting across the top. "The Story of Dad and Rowan," by Rowan Harrington. Max took the little book in both hands. He opened the first page. On the left was a drawing of a man sitting alone in a big, empty room, staring out a window. On the right, in Rowan's careful handwriting, were the words, "Once upon a time, there was a very sad dad because he didn't know he had a son." Second page. A drawing of a small boy sitting on a bed in a room full of bunk beds, holding a toy robot, and a very lonely little boy who wished very much to find his dad. Max turned the pages. Page after page, Rowan had drawn their entire story. The orphanage with the iron gate and flowers filling the yard. Their first meeting in the recreation room, the tall man crouched beside the little table. The courtroom with the judge, behind the big wooden desk. The black car carrying them home. The Lincoln Park house with the swing set in the backyard. The two of them sitting together under the stars. The last page. A drawing of a man and a little boy holding hands in front of the house. Above them, the sun was shining, and the winged woman smiled. The words underneath. "And they lived happily ever after, because love is the strongest thing in the world." Max stared at the last page, and for the second time in his life, Maxfield Harrington cried. No holding it back, no hiding it, no turning away. Tears ran down his face and fell onto the page, blurring one corner of the sky Rowan had colored in blue. The first time he'd cried was when he learned the truth about his son in the orphanage yard. This time, he cried because he was seeing the whole story of their lives retold in crayons and a 7-year-old heart. "What do you think, Dad?" Rowan asked, his voice tight with hope. Max wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at his son. "It's the most beautiful book I've ever read in my entire life." "Really? Really, really? Really, really? And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get this book printed for real, with a hardcover and everything, so we can keep it forever." Rowan's eyes lit up. "That's so cool. Can I write another book?" "You can write as many books as you want, buddy. You are a very talented writer and artist." Rowan jumped up and wrapped his arms around Max's neck, and Max held him tight, the little crayon book still in his hand, more precious than any multi-million-dollar contract he'd ever signed in his life. 2 years passed. Rowan was 9 now, taller, thinner, his black hair still falling into his forehead, but his green eyes shining with a confidence he hadn't even known existed 2 years earlier. He was chosen to be the student speaker at St. Martha School's 3rd grade graduation because he had the highest academic record in his class. On the morning of the ceremony, Max stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, buttoning a white dress shirt and rolling the sleeves up to his forearms. No black suit, no tie, no Patek Philippe. Today he wasn't Maxfield Harrington, CEO of Harrington Holdings. He was only Rowan's dad, coming to watch his son graduate 3rd grade. When they arrived at the school, Max shook hands with other parents, smiled, made small talk, looking no different from any other father in the crowd. But at the school gate, standing under the shade of a big maple tree, Pax Mercer was still there, an earpiece tucked discreetly in his ear, eyes sweeping the parking lot, and the steady flow of people coming and going. No one noticed him. Pax had always known how to become invisible when he needed to. Even though Max had left the underworld completely, even though Harrington Holdings was now a clean corporation with no darkness behind it, the shadow of the past never vanished entirely. Pax understood that better than anyone. He wasn't the bodyguard of a mafia boss anymore. He was the bodyguard of a father, and he did that job with no less devotion. The small auditorium at St. Martha was decorated with balloons and congratulatory banners. Parents filled the rows of chairs, cameras and phones already raised. Max sat in the middle section, right by the aisle, where Rowan could see him from the stage. After Principal Pemberton gave a short speech and handed out awards to each student, Rowan was invited to the podium. The boy stepped up with steady feet, both hands holding the paper he'd prepared, but he didn't look down at it even once. He looked straight at the audience and began to speak in a voice that was clear, calm, and so sincere, the whole auditorium fell silent. Dear classmates, parents, and teachers, thank you for letting me speak today. I learned so many important things at school: reading, writing, math, science, but the most important thing I learned wasn't from a textbook. He paused. I learned that family isn't just who is born with you. Family is who chooses to love you every single day. I learned that it's never too late to find the people you love, and that love can happen in the places you least expect. I want to thank my dad, who found me when I needed it most. Rowan looked straight at Max in the crowd. You didn't just find me, Dad. You chose me. Every single day. And that's what makes you the best dad in the world. The whole room applauded. Many parents wiped away tears. Mrs. Pemberton stood at the side of the stage, one hand pressed to her chest. Max stood and clapped. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but this time he smiled through them. No breaking apart, no choking on emotion, just pride. Pure, absolute pride. After the ceremony, the two of them went for ice cream at the shop they loved most on Clark Street. Rowan ordered a cup with 2 scoops of mint chocolate chip. Max ordered a simple vanilla. They sat by the window, watching people pass on the sidewalk. How does it feel to be done with 3rd grade? Max asked. Happy, but also excited to learn more. I already know what I want to be when I grow up. What do you want to be? I want to be a lawyer who protects kids, so I can help other kids who are still in orphanages find their families, like how Dr. Griffith helped us. Max smiled. That's a beautiful choice, buddy. Rowan lifted another spoonful of ice cream, then suddenly stopped, looking at Max with a different expression. More serious, deeper. Dad, I want to tell you something I've never told anyone. Max set his spoon down. What is it? The night before you came to the orphanage for the very first time, I had a dream. Max stayed quiet, waiting. A woman came to me in the dream. She had green eyes, just like mine, and long brown hair, and she was smiling. She said to me, "He's coming tomorrow. Draw the family." That's it. That's all she said. And when I woke up that morning, I went straight to the art room and started drawing. That's why I was drawing that picture when you walked in. The house, the woman, the little boy, and the empty space where the dad was supposed to be. Max went still. The ice cream spoon in his hand froze in midair. The green eyes, the long brown hair, the smile. Vivian. I never told anyone because I thought they'd say it was just a silly dream, Rowan continued, his voice softer now. But it didn't feel like a dream, Dad. It felt real, like she was really there. Do you think it was Mom? Max looked at his son. A 9-year-old boy with Vivian's eyes was looking back at him, waiting for the answer. And in that moment, Max saw everything with completely new eyes. The drawing in the recreation room that afternoon, the house, the woman, the boy, and the empty space for the father who hadn't arrived yet. Rowan hadn't drawn it by accident. He'd been guided. Max swallowed the lump in his throat and said, his voice rough but steady, I think it was definitely her, buddy. I think your mom has been watching over both of us from the very beginning. and I think she's the one who brought us together." Rowan smiled, the peaceful smile of a child who'd finally received the answer he'd been waiting a long time to hear. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, looking up at the sky through the ice cream shop window. "Thank you for bringing me my dad." On the 5th anniversary of the day father and son first met, Max woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning and went downstairs to the kitchen before Rowan stirred. He made heart-shaped pancakes, placed blueberries on top according to the rule Rowan had taught him from the very first day, poured a glass of fresh orange juice, and carried the tray up to his son's room. Rowan was 12 now, noticeably taller, his black hair still falling into his forehead, but his face beginning to take on the lines of a teenager. He opened his eyes, looked at the pancake tray, then looked at Max. "What are we celebrating today, Dad?" "The most important day of our lives. The day we found each other. 5 years ago today." Rowan sat up, accepted the tray, and smiled. 5 years already. It feels like yesterday, and it feels like a really long time ago at the same time. "What do you mean?" "It feels like yesterday because I remember every single detail. The crayons, the drawing, the first time you sat down next to me. But it feels like a long time because I can't imagine my life without you anymore." Max sat on the edge of the bed. "Rowan, in these 5 years, you've taught me so much about what really matters in life." "What did I teach you?" "You taught me that success isn't money or power. It's having someone to love. It's having someone who needs you. It's waking up every morning knowing that you matter to somebody, not because of what you own or what you control, but because of who you are." Rowan nodded slowly, then spoke in that calm voice that sometimes made Max forget his son was only 12. "You taught me things too, Dad. You taught me that love is patience when someone is learning something new. Love is being there even when it's hard. Love is making pancakes on Saturday morning even when you're tired." He paused. "And love is also letting someone change who they are, so they can become who they're supposed to be." Max looked at his son. That sentence carried more weight than it seemed to on the surface. Rowan would never know about the phantom, about the underworld, about the midnight calls and the envelopes with no return address. But somehow, the boy understood that Max had changed, that the man sitting in front of him today wasn't the man who'd walked into the orphanage 5 years ago, and Rowan respected that change without needing to ask why. That afternoon, the two of them drove to St. Francis Orphanage. The old pale yellow building Max had first visited was completely transformed now. Thanks to Max's steady donations over 5 years, the orphanage had been fully renovated. The dorm rooms were repainted in bright, cheerful colors. A new playground with slides, swings, and climbing structures replaced the empty patch of grass from before. A small but well-stocked library had been added on the first floor. "Sister Agnes!" Rowan ran through the iron gate, now repainted and gleaming, and threw his arms around the elderly nun. "My dear Rowan," Sister Agnes said, hugging him tight before stepping back to look at him. "Look how you've grown. You're such a fine young man." "I came to show the kids that dreams do come true, sister," Rowan said. "I came to tell them that I found my family, and that they will find theirs too." Rowan spent the whole afternoon playing with the younger children. He told them stories, helped them draw, and patiently sat beside the shyest ones until they smiled. Max watched from a distance, leaning against the gate, looking at his son. Sister Agnes stepped up beside him. "He's special," she said. "He always was, but now he shines in a completely different way. It's love, sister. Love changes everything. And you? How is this journey of fatherhood treating you?" "It's the best journey of my life. Every day I learn something new from him. Every day I become a better person because of him." On the drive home, Rowan sat quietly in the back seat, looking out the window. Max knew his son was thinking, "What's on your mind, buddy? Those little kids back there, they're still waiting for their families. I wish they could all be as happy as I am." Max looked at Rowan in the rearview mirror. "What if we could do something about that?" "What do you mean?" "We could start a foundation. To help orphanages, to support adoptions, to make it easier for kids to find their families. You could be my partner in this." Rowan's eyes lit up. "Really? I could actually help other kids find their moms and dads? We could do it together. You with your ideas, and me with the resources. What should we call it?" Max smiled. "What do you think?" Rowan thought for a moment, watching the sky shift from orange to purple through the car window. Then he said, "Heart Encounters Foundation." "Why that name?" "Because that's what happened to us, Dad. Our hearts found each other. That night, the two of them sat on the second-floor balcony, looking at Chicago's night sky. Stars glittered above the old maple tree, and the summer wind carried warmth from Lake Michigan. "Dad, can I ask you one last question?" "Always." "Do you feel like your life is complete now?" Max looked at his son, a 12-year-old boy with Vivian's green eyes and a dimpled smile like his own. The child who'd once sat alone drawing in the corner of an orphanage recreation room was now beside him on their balcony, planning a charitable foundation that would help hundreds of other children find families. "More than complete, son. My life is overflowing with love and purpose, and it's all because of you." Rowan rested his head on Max's shoulder. "I found not just a father, Dad. I found a best friend, a teacher, a protector, and a partner for life." "Partners for life," Max agreed, wrapping an arm around his son. They sat there, father and son, under the Chicago sky, in the house they both called home, knowing there are stories that never truly end. They only keep growing, day by day, hug by hug, pancake morning by pancake morning, starry night by starry night. Max and Rowan's story was one of those, because true love doesn't recognize time, doesn't recognize distance, and always finds a way to bring the hearts that belong together back to each other. And somewhere among the stars, Vivian was smiling, because she knew her son had finally found the home he'd always deserved, and the most feared man in Chicago had finally found something no empire on earth could ever provide: the love of a son. This beautiful story teaches all of us that real love always finds a way to bring the people who belong together back to each other. Sometimes the greatest things in life arrive when we least expect them, and a charity trip that seems ordinary can become the most important encounter of a lifetime. Max discovered that true wealth isn't in a bank account, but in the arms of a son who finally found his father. And Rowan learned that dreams come true when we keep our hearts open and never lose hope. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with the people you love, the people who believe in second chances. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new stories, because every day we bring you inspiring stories about love and family. We'd love to hear how you feel. What did this story make you think about in real life? Do you believe in destiny? Share with us in the comments below, because every heartfelt comment from you is a huge motivation for us to keep creating meaningful content. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.